The padlock was brass, new, still wearing a little sticker from the hardware store. And my brother's thumb was resting on it like he owned the whole building. "You're 2 days late to matter, Bethany," Aaron said, loud enough for our uncle and 2 cousins standing in the storage corridor to hear. "This isn't about your old paper. This is about real family needs." I looked past him at the roll-up door of Unit 214, at the shine of a lock that had never touched my father's things until after he was in the ground. And I said the only thing I trusted myself to say. "Don't open that box until the manager gets here. If this kind of quiet injustice gets under your skin the way it got under mine, stay with me and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. My name is Bethany Cross. I am 35 years old, and I am an archivist for a county historical society here in St. Louis, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days making sure that paper survives longer than the people who wrote on it. I catalog land deeds. I stabilize water-damaged ledgers. I know the difference between a folder that will crumble in 20 years and one that will outlive us all. It is quiet work, unglamorous work. The kind of work my brother has mocked since we were kids, sharing a bunk bed in a 2-bedroom rental on Cherokee Street. Our father, Daniel Cross, died on a Tuesday in March, 4 weeks after a diagnosis that didn't give any of us time to prepare. He was 68. He drove a delivery truck for 30 years and kept every receipt, every letter, every school photo in a storage unit 2 miles from the house he rented until the end, because he never trusted apartments with thin walls to keep anything safe. That storage unit, Unit 214 at Riverbend Self-Storage on Gravois, was the closest thing my father had to an archive of his own life. I didn't know that phrase would matter so much until it was too late to say it to him. The funeral was on a Saturday. Aaron changed the lock on Monday. I want to take you back to the beginning of that week, because the corridor with the brass padlock wasn't the first blow. It was just the one that finally made me stop absorbing them quietly. The first blow came at the funeral home, 2 days before we buried him. In a small side room with beige carpet and a box of tissues nobody had touched yet. My mother, Lila, was signing paperwork with a funeral director named Mr. Osei, and Aaron stood behind her chair with his hand on her shoulder, like he was holding her up, though she has never once needed holding up in her life. There was a manila folder on the table, my father's obituary draft, still warm from the printer. "We'll list Aaron as the primary contact," my mother said, not looking at me. "He's closer. He can handle logistics." I said, "I can handle logistics too, Mom. I do it professionally." Aaron laughed, short and dismissive, the kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh at all. "You handle paper in a basement, Beth. This is different. This is people." That was the first micro-injury, small enough that I let it go. The manila folder sitting there on the table, like evidence I didn't yet know I'd need to remember. The second blow came the night before the funeral, at my mother's kitchen table. Over a cardboard box of loose photographs someone had pulled from Dad's nightstand drawer. Aaron was sorting them into 2 piles, keep and toss, with the brisk efficiency of a man clearing out a garage sale. "We don't need 6 pictures of the same Christmas," he said, tossing 3 into a trash bag on the floor. "Those aren't duplicates," I said, picking one back out. "Look at the dates on the back. Dad wrote them himself. This one's from the year Grandpa was still alive. Nobody's gonna notice, Beth." I noticed. Of course you did. He didn't even look up. "You notice paper. The rest of us are trying to plan a funeral." I kept that photograph. I have it still, tucked into a folder in my own filing cabinet at home. A small rescued thing that told me something was already going wrong long before the locks changed. The third blow came the morning of the funeral itself, in the parking lot of the church, where my Uncle Wes pulled me aside with his hands jammed in his coat pockets and a look on his face like he was about to hand me bad news wrapped in kindness. "Your brother's talking about handling the storage unit himself," Wes said. Said, "It'll be faster if it's just him and your mom." Dad wanted me involved. He told me that himself, Wes, more than once. "I know, sweetheart. I'm just telling you what I'm hearing." He looked at his shoes. "You might want to say something before it gets decided without you." I did say something. I said it to my mother that same afternoon, standing in the receiving line at the funeral home, both of us in black. Both of us exhausted past the point of tears, and she patted my arm. The way you pat a child who has asked for a cookie before dinner. "We'll sort it all out after things settle down, Bethany. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Things did not settle down. 2 days after we buried our father, Aaron drove to Riverbend Self-Storage alone and had the lock changed on Unit 214. I found out from a text message, the fourth blow, sent to a family group chat at 7:42 in the morning while I was still in my work clothes making coffee. It read, "Change the lock on Dad's unit for security. We'll let everyone know when we're ready to go through things. No need for anyone to come out there right now. No need for anyone." I read that sentence 4 times, standing in my kitchen with my archivist badge, already clipped to my blouse, and something in me went very still. The way it does when I find a document that has been altered and I have to figure out exactly how and when. The fifth blow came 2 days after that, when I drove out to Riverbend anyway. Because I am my father's daughter, and I do not let a locked door decide what I'm allowed to know. I found Erin already there with our cousin Denise and her husband, a rented cargo van backed up to Unit 214, and 3 boxes already sitting on a dolly labeled in my father's neat block handwriting, "Papers, do not discard." "You weren't invited," Erin said, stepping in front of the dolly like it was a border he was guarding. "I don't need to be invited to my own father's things." "You had your chance to help, Beth. You were too busy with your museum job to answer your phone the day we cleared his apartment. Where were you then?" That was the 6th blow, and it landed harder than the others because it wasn't entirely a lie. I had missed a call that day in the middle of a preservation training I couldn't step out of, and I had spent every night since replaying it, wondering if 30 missed minutes had cost me a seat at a table that used to be mine by birthright. Aaron knew exactly which nerve to press, and he pressed it in front of Denise and her husband, both of whom looked at me like I was the stray family member who'd shown up uninvited to someone else's inheritance. I did not cry in that parking lot. I want to tell you that clearly, because for a long time, crying was the thing I did when I felt outmatched. And I had felt outmatched by Aaron my whole life. He was louder. He was faster with a comeback. He had our mother's instinct for making himself the center of any room. But something shifted in me, standing there watching him guard a dolly of my father's papers, like a bouncer at a club I used to belong to. I stopped pleading. I started counting. I counted the boxes on the dolly. 3. I counted the ones still visible through the open roll-up door behind him. At least 8 more. I counted the days since the funeral. 4. I counted, silently, the number of times my father had told me, in the last year of his life, over coffee at the kitchen table, where I now sat alone most Sundays, that he wanted me to be the one who kept his record straight. "He told me I was authorized on that unit, Aaron," I said, keeping my voice level in a way that surprised even me.
He told me that in January. He never told me that. Aaron crossed his arms. And it's not on the account. I checked.
It's my name and Mom's name. That's it. Then someone should check the actual paperwork, not just what you assume is on it. Go ahead and check, Beth. Go find your paperwork. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. That's your whole life, isn't it? Paperwork instead of people. I didn't answer him. I walked to the front office instead, past a row of orange roll-up doors, toward a small glass window where a man in a Riverbend polo shirt was typing something into a computer with the unhurried patience of a person who has seen every kind of family fall apart in that corridor. His name tag said Keene. Mr. Keene, as I'd come to know him, was the facility manager. A man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a laminated binder of rules he clearly enforced with more consistency than most people enforce anything. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I need to know if there's an authorized user on Unit 214 besides the two names currently on file," I said. "My name is Bethany Cross. My father was Daniel Cross. He passed away last week." Mr. Teen's face didn't change much, but something in his posture did. The small straightening of a man who takes his job more seriously than his uniform suggests. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "Let me pull the account." That was the pivot. Not a dramatic one. Not a movie moment with swelling music. Just a woman in a cardigan, asking a stranger to check a record instead of asking her own family to be kind. It felt, in that moment, like the first honest thing I'd done since my father died. Mr. Keene typed for a while, scrolled, typed again, and then looked up at me over his glasses. "There's an addendum on this account from December," he said, "added by the original renter, Daniel Cross. It lists a second authorized user." He turned the monitor slightly, not enough to violate anyone's privacy, but enough that I could see my own name typed in a field labeled Additional Authorized Access. "That's you, isn't it?" I put my hand flat on the counter to steady myself. "Yes, that's me." He came in himself to sign it, December 18th. I remember because he brought me a thermos of coffee, said it was too cold to be standing at a counter all day. Mr. Keene almost smiled at the memory. Nice man. Talked about his daughter who worked with old records. Said he wanted to make sure she'd have access if anything happened to him. I stood very still because I could feel the shape of the moment I was in, the way you feel the shape of a document before you've even read the words. Just from the weight of the paper and the color of the ink, my father had known. My father had planned for exactly this, months before Aaron ever touched a padlock. And no one had told me, not because it was a secret, but because nobody had asked. "There's more," Mr. Keene said. He specified 3 boxes by number, said those were, quote, hers to keep track of. I made a note of it because it's unusual. Most folks don't get that specific. "Can I see that note?" "I can print the addendum for you." "That's a legitimate request from a listed authorized user." He glanced past me, toward the corridor, toward the sound of a cargo van door sliding shut. "Are you having a dispute with another account holder right now?" "Yes," I said. "My brother changed the lock 2 days after the funeral, and he's removing boxes without me." Mr. Keene's expression didn't shift into drama or alarm. It shifted into procedure, which, as an archivist, is a language I understand and trust more than almost any other. "Then I think we should walk down there together," he said, "and I'll bring the access log." The 7th blow, though I didn't know it would be a blow until it landed, came in the corridor itself, minutes later, when Aaron saw Mr. Keen approaching with a printed sheet in his hand and a keyring that clearly wasn't mine or his.
"What's this?" Aaron said. And for the first time that day, I heard something under his bravado that sounded almost like uncertainty. "Mr. Keen, this is my brother Aaron," I said. "Aaron, Mr. Keen manages this facility." I asked him to check the account before anyone opens another box. "There's nothing to check," Aaron said. "I'm on the account." "So is your sister," Keen said, not unkindly, just factually, the way you'd read a measurement off a tape. "As of December 18th, added by Daniel Cross in person. I have the addendum right here, if you'd both like to see it." Aaron's jaw tightened. That doesn't sound right. Dad never mentioned that. "He mentioned it to me," Mr. Keen said, "and it's documented. I don't make exceptions to the log, Mr. Cross." "That's not how we do things here." I watched my brother's face do the thing it used to do when we were kids, and he got caught in a lie that had seemed foolproof 5 minutes earlier. A flicker of recalibration before the next excuse arrived. "Fine," Aaron said. "So she's on the account. That doesn't mean she gets to show up and take over. I've been doing all the work here. Where was she when I drove out here Monday and dealt with that lock? By myself? You changed the lock without telling me," I said. "That's not the same as doing the work alone. That's doing the work in secret. I changed it for security. Anyone could have walked in here. Anyone with a key that Dad gave out on purpose," I said. "Which is what I had until you decided I didn't." Denise, standing near the van with her arms crossed, said quietly, "Aaron, maybe we should just wait." "We're not waiting," Aaron snapped. "I told everyone at the funeral. Bethany doesn't care about the actual family. She cares about old paper. She wasn't even here when it mattered. She missed the call when we cleared his apartment. She shows up now with a manager and a printout like this is a courtroom." That was the counterattack. Delivered loud enough for Wes to hear from where he stood near his truck. Loud enough that a stranger renting the unit 2 doors down paused with his own dolly to watch. I felt the old shame rise in my chest. The specific shame of being called cold in front of people who have never once asked what my work actually requires of me, the discipline of it, the care. I did not raise my voice. I have learned over years of testifying about provenance in front of skeptical board members that volume is not the same as strength. "I understand it looks that way to you," I said. "But I'd like to see the log before anything else leaves this unit." "Mr. Keen, would you mind pulling the full history, not just the addendum?" "Not at all," he said. And I could tell from the way he said it that he had already anticipated the request, because men like Mr. Keen keep exact records, not for drama, but because drama is exactly what exact records are meant to prevent. He walked us to a small office near the front, more of an alcove, really, with a desk, a printer, and a wall-mounted monitor that cycled through grainy black and white feeds from the hallway cameras. He sat down, typed a query, and the printer began to hum. "Here's the access log for Unit 214, going back 6 months, he said, handing me a warm sheet of paper. Every entry code used, every date and time. I scanned it, the way I scan an unfamiliar ledger, top to bottom, looking for the shape of the story before I look for any single line. My father's entries were there, regular, almost weekly, sometimes twice a week in the months before he got sick. Then a gap, the weeks of his illness. Then, 4 days after his funeral, a new entry. Aaron Cross, 12:03 a.m. Midnight, I said, out loud, before I meant to. Just after, Mr. Keen said, tapping the line with his pen. 12:03 in the morning, the day after the service.
That's when the lock was changed. Our maintenance staff logs any lock replacement requests separately, and there's a note here that Mr. Cross called an emergency locksmith line rather than using our on-site service, which we do have available during business hours.
I couldn't get out there during business hours, Aaron said quickly. I have a job, Beth. Not everyone gets to keep banker's hours cataloging dead people's grocery lists. You could have called me, I said. You could have called Mom. Instead, you drove out here alone at midnight and changed a lock on a unit that had my name on the account since December. I didn't know that. You didn't ask. Mr. Keene cleared his throat gently, the sound of a man trying not to referee. A family fight, but finding himself standing exactly in the middle of one anyway. There's also the camera timestamps, if that would help clarify things, he said. We keep footage for 90 days per corporate policy. I can pull the relevant window. Please, I said. He turned the monitor toward us and clicked through a folder of files labeled by date. The footage was grainy, time-stamped in the corner in stark white numbers, and it showed the corridor outside Unit 214 at 11:58 p.m. Empty, quiet, lit only by the fluorescent strip lights that never turn off. Then, at 12:01, a figure entered frame. Unmistakably Aaron, carrying a duffel bag and what looked like a small toolkit. At 12:04, a locksmith in a reflective vest joined him. By 12:19, the new lock was on, and the two of them were carrying the first of several boxes toward a car parked just out of frame. That's 4 boxes he took that night, Mr. Keene said, checking a note beside the footage log. Our overnight security noted the vehicle and flagged it for review since it was outside normal hours, though nothing illegal was done since he was on the account at the time. Just unusual. 4 boxes, I repeated, before anyone else even knew the lock had changed. Aaron's face had gone pale under the fluorescent light. And for the first time that day, he didn't have an answer ready. Wes had come to stand in the doorway of the little office, and even Denise had stopped watching the van and started watching her cousin instead. I was protecting Dad's things, Aaron said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I didn't know she had access. I wasn't trying to steal anything. Nobody said steal, I said quietly. But you told everyone at the funeral I only care about paper. You told them I don't care about real family needs. And this whole time you knew, or you should have known, that Dad went out of his way in December, sober, healthy enough to walk into this office and drink coffee with Mr. Keene, and specifically added me to this account and specifically marked boxes for me. By number. That was the decisive, factual blow. Not shouted, not triumphant. Just laid on the table, the way you lay a document in front of a committee that has been arguing without evidence for too long. Mr. Keene slid one more sheet across the desk, the addendum itself. My father's signature at the bottom, in the same handwriting that had labeled 100 boxes over the years. Papers. Do not discard. And beneath it, in a smaller, more deliberate hand, a note. Boxes 4, 7, and 11, designated for Bethany Cross, archivist, per her professional capacity and by my request. I read that line 3 times. Per her professional capacity. My father, who had teased me gently my whole life about my love of old paper, who had once called my job keeping the past in a drawer, with a fond, crooked smile, had written down in an official document that my work mattered enough to name. He never told me any of this, my mother said. I turned. I hadn't heard her arrive, but there she was, in the corridor entrance, still in her church coat, Having come, I would learn later. Because Wes had called her the moment things started to unravel. "Mom," I said. "He never told me he added the addendum," she said again. And her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since the night we got the diagnosis call. "I knew he talked about you handling his papers someday. I thought it was just talk. I didn't know he'd made it official." "It's dated December 18th, I said gently, 2 months before he got sick. He knew what he wanted. My mother looked at Aaron, and something passed between them that I recognized. The particular guilt of a parent who has let one child's confidence stand in for the truth for too long. "Aaron told me you'd missed calls, missed the apartment clearing, that you'd said you were too busy," she said. "I believed him because it was easier than calling you myself to ask." "I missed one call," I said, "during a training I couldn't leave. I called back within the hour. I've been trying to be part of this since the day he died, Mom. I just haven't been loud about it." Aaron opened his mouth, likely to defend himself again, but Mr. Keene, without any drama, simply said, "The log doesn't lie, Mr. Cross. I'm happy to email a full copy to all parties on the account if that would help settle things. That's standard when there's a dispute." "Please do," I said. "And I'd like the boxes that were removed at midnight returned, along with the 3 that were designated for me." "I can return what the camera shows leaving," Aaron said finally. Some of the fight draining out of his voice, replaced by something more like fatigue. "I don't remember exactly what was in each box. It was 2 a.m. I wasn't exactly taking inventory." "Then we'll match it against the log and the footage," I said, box by box. "That's how you reconstruct a chain of custody when the paperwork's incomplete. It's what I do for a living." There was a long silence in that little office, filled only by the hum of the printer cooling down and the distant sound of a garage door somewhere else in the facility rattling open. Wes finally spoke, quiet, almost apologetic. "I should have called you the day he changed that lock, Beth. I heard him talking about it, and I didn't think it was my place." "It's all right, Wes," I said, though it wasn't entirely. Not yet. "You told me eventually. That's more than some people managed." We spent the next 2 hours in that corridor, and I want to describe it plainly, because it wasn't a triumphant scene from a courtroom drama. It was tedious, careful, exactly the kind of work I've done 1,000 times in the Historical Society's basement. Except this time, the boxes belonged to my own father, and the stakes were not a museum's reputation, but the last physical trace of a man's life. Mr. Keene brought a folding table into the corridor and set the printed access log on it, along with the addendum and a notepad. Aaron, Denise, Wes, my mother and I stood around it while one by one, boxes were carried out of the newly reopened Unit 214, the brass padlock now hanging useless from a hasp. Mr. Keene had cut with bolt cutters, the accepted procedure, he explained, when an authorized user is denied access by another party on the same account. Box 1. Mr. Keene read off a label, and Aaron lifted it onto the table. Inside were old tax returns, decades of them, rubber-banded by year in my father's handwriting. Not one of the 3 marked for me. I noted it and moved on. Box 4, Mr. Keene said next, and I felt my chest tighten, because 4 was one of the numbers from the addendum. Aaron found it near the back of the unit, dust thick on its lid, clearly untouched since the midnight run. Inside were folders, real folders, acid-free ones I recognized because I had bought them. For my father 2 Christmases ago, as a half-joking gift, an archivist's version of a tool belt. He had used every one.
birth certificates, his parents' immigration papers.
A folder labeled Bethany School, containing every report card I'd ever brought home, even the mediocre ones from 9th grade algebra. Even a note from a teacher praising my handwriting at age 9. A folder labeled family recipes in my grandmother's hand, the ones Aaron had once said nobody would ever cook from again. "He kept all of this?" I said quietly, and my mother, standing beside me, put her hand over her mouth.
Box 7, Mr. Keene read, and this one Aaron had to search for longer because it turned out to be one of the boxes taken at midnight, sitting instead in the back of the cargo van, half forgotten among boxes of kitchenware and tools nobody had bothered to inventory. When he brought it back and set it on the table, the tape across the top had already been cut and resealed carelessly. And I felt something cold move through me, the specific professional alarm of an archivist looking at a broken seal on a box marked for preservation. "Did you open this?" I asked. "I looked through some of them that night," Aaron admitted. "I was trying to figure out what mattered. I didn't know there was a system." Inside, folders were out of order, some creased. One water-stained, where it looked like a coffee cup had been set directly on top of loose photographs. The same kind of casual damage I spend my professional life trying to prevent in other people's family collections. I didn't yell. "I want you to understand that I wanted to, that some old, younger version of me was screaming inside my chest at the sight of my father's letters bent at careless angles. But I have handled 200-year-old land deeds with more respect than my own brother handled a box our father packed himself. And I was not going to let this moment turn me into someone I'd spent years training myself not to be. "This can be repaired," I said instead, mostly to myself. "Not perfectly, but it can be stabilized." "Box 11, Mr. Keene said, the last of the 3, and this one, thankfully, had never left the unit at all, its tape unbroken. Its label in my father's own hand, still crisp. For Bethany, the important ones. I did not open it there in the corridor. Some things deserve a table with good light and clean hands, not a folding table in a storage facility hallway with everyone watching. I simply put my palm flat against the top of it, the way you might rest a hand on someone's shoulder, and said, "I'll go through this one at home. If you've ever had to fight to protect something your parent trusted specifically to you, tell me about it below." I read every comment, and it helps to know I'm not the only one who stood in a hallway like that. We did not finish that day. Chain of custody, real chain of custody, is slow, and I insisted on doing it properly rather than quickly, which frustrated Aaron in a way that told me everything about how he'd approached this from the start. "Can't we just take what's ours and go?" he asked, an hour in, as Mr. Keene cross-referenced yet another box against the log. "This is exactly how it goes wrong the first time," I said. "Someone rushes, something gets lost or damaged, and then nobody can prove what was where. I'm not doing that to Dad's records. They're not records, Beth. They're just his stuff. They're both," I said. "That's the part you've never understood." Mr. Keene, to his credit, stayed until the facility's closing time, and then offered, unprompted, to come in an hour early the next morning so we could finish without rushing. "I don't often see families sort things out calmly," he said to me quietly. While Aaron argued with Denise's husband about how to fold down the dolly. "Most of the time it's shouting and threats of lawyers. You're doing this the right way, for what it's worth." "Thank you," I said. "It helps to have someone keeping honest records." "That's the job," he said, simply. I recognized in him a kindred spirit.
Someone who understood that the truth is rarely dramatic, just documented. The eighth blow, if I'm counting honestly. And I am someone who counts honestly. Now came not from Erin, but from my mother 2 days later. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her. "I want you to know I didn't help him hide anything from you," she said. The addendum. "I didn't know. I believe you, Mom. But I let him talk about you like you weren't as involved as you were. At the funeral home, in the kitchen with the photographs." I let it stand because it was easier than arguing with him while I was grieving your father. She wrapped both hands around the mug. That's on me too. Not just Erin. I didn't rush to forgive her in that moment, and I want to be honest about that. Because pretending forgiveness arrives instantly and completely isn't fair to anyone who's lived through something like this. "I need some time with that," I said. "But I'm glad you said it." "Your father used to talk about you at night," she said, after a while. "Near the end, he'd say, 'Bethany will know what to do with all this when I'm gone. She'll know how to keep it right.'" I thought he meant the practical things. Bills, insurance. I didn't understand he meant all of it. The photographs, the letters, even the recipes. "He knew what my work actually is," I said. Even when he joked about it. I'm sorry I didn't. That apology mattered to me more than I expected it to, not because it fixed everything, but because it was specific. It named the exact failure, instead of gesturing vaguely at a hard time. I have learned in my work that specific record-keeping is the only kind that actually protects anyone, and I think the same is true of apologies. Erin's apology, when it finally came a week later, was different, smaller, more conditional, and I think that's honest to who he is. So I won't pretend it was more than it was. We met at Riverbend again, this time by arrangement rather than confrontation. Mr. Keen present as a neutral witness, the way he'd become almost by default, standing near the folding table with a clipboard. Not because either of us had asked him to referee, but because he'd offered. And because I think he'd grown quietly invested in seeing the boxes settled properly. "I brought back what the footage showed leaving that night," Erin said, gesturing at 4 boxes lined up against the wall, 2 of which I recognized, 2 of which I did not. I looked through what I still had at my place. Some stuff got mixed into boxes I was keeping for the garage sale. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what's missing. I wasn't careful. "I know," I said. "I'm not going to say I did everything wrong," he added, some of the old defensiveness creeping back in. "Dad's my dad, too." I wanted to feel like I was doing something, and you weren't there that first week, and it felt like... He stopped himself. It felt easier to be angry at you than to admit I didn't know what I was doing. "That's honest, at least," I said. "I'm not giving you the storage unit outright," he added quickly, as if worried I'd take too much from the moment. "Mom and I are still on the account, but I'm not touching anything else without you there. And the 3 boxes are yours, fully. I won't argue that again." It was not a full accounting. It was not everything back the way it had been packed, not every photograph returned to its original folder. Not every rubber band where my father had placed it. Some things, I would learn over the following weeks, were genuinely gone. Either damaged, beyond saving, or simply lost somewhere in the shuffle of that midnight run. A few loose photographs, a small notebook Erin admitted he'd thrown out thinking it was scrap paper. That loss stayed with me longer than I expected. A specific grief layered on top of the larger one. The grief of an archivist who understands that some damage cannot be undone, no matter how carefully you handle what remains. But it was something.
It was Aaron, returning what the camera caught. No more, no less. An honest, if incomplete reckoning. And I decided that unequal repair was still repair. Even if it wasn't the clean, complete restoration I might have wanted in a different kind of story. If this story is landing with you, hit follow so you don't miss the next one. And let me know in the comments what chain of custody means in our own family. Because I think most of us have one, whether we call it that or not. Over the following month, I brought the 3 boxes home one at a time. First box 4, then box 7, then finally box 11. The one marked for the important ones. And I want to tell you what I found there. Because I think it explains something about my father that no eulogy managed to capture. In box 11, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a letter he had written. To me, the previous December, the same month he'd added me to the account, dated the same day as the addendum. He must have written it right after leaving Mr. Keene's office. It read, in his familiar, slightly slanted hand, Bethany, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you finally got in here to look. I know Aaron thinks your work is just old paper. I used to think that too, if I'm honest, before you explained to me. Once, why a folder matters as much as what's in it. You said something about how the order tells a story, even when nobody reads the words. I think about that a lot. This unit is full of our order, yours and mine, and your grandmother's before us. I trust you to keep it right, not because you're the oldest or the favorite, but because you're the one who understands that things need to be kept, not just kept around. Take care of the family story the way you take care of everyone else's. I love you. Dad. I sat with that letter for a long time before I filed it, because even an archivist has to grieve before she can catalog. Alongside the letter were the smaller things that make up a person's real record. More precious to me than any deed or ledger I'd ever preserved professionally. A Mother's Day card I'd made him in 3rd grade, which he'd apparently kept. Though it was addressed, by a child's mistake, to Dad instead of Mom, a fact that had clearly amused him enough to save it anyway. A photograph of my father as a young man, maybe 20, standing outside a diner on Route 66, with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy. A version of him none of us had ever met. A small brass key, unlabeled, that I would later discover opened an old filing cabinet in his apartment that Aaron had already sold at an estate sale. A small, permanent loss that reminded me why chain of custody matters even when the stakes seem small. And at the very bottom of box 11, wrapped carefully in acid-free tissue paper that I recognized immediately because it was the exact kind I had given him with those folders 2 Christmases before, was his fountain pen. It was nothing extravagant, a simple black lacquer pen with a gold nib, the kind you can buy at any stationery store. But it was the pen he had used for 30 years to write labels, on boxes, to sign birthday cards, to fill out the addendum that had, months later, become the reason I got to stand in that corridor and ask a stranger to pull an access log instead of standing there begging my own brother to be fair. I held that pen for a long time before I did anything else with it. In the weeks that followed, I began the slow work of restoring what had been damaged. The water-stained photographs from box 7, carefully separated and dried between sheets of blotting paper, the way I would treat any historical collection, the creased folders smoothed as much as they could be smoothed.
A small binder created to document exactly what had been lost, exactly what had been recovered, and exactly where each item now lived. Because that is what my father asked of me, and because it is, frankly, the only way I know how to grieve properly. I did this work one folder at a time, some evenings for only 20 minutes before I had to stop. Other nights for hours at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold beside me, much like my mother's had gone cold at her own table the week before. I labeled a new set of boxes, using my professional supplies rather than whatever. Aaron had grabbed from a hardware store, acid-free, archival grade. The kind that will actually last as long as the paper inside them. I created a simple inventory, 3 columns, item, condition, location. The same format I use at work for donated family collections. Because grief, I've found, responds well to structure, even when nothing else does. My mother came over one Sunday while I was working through box 4, and instead of hovering the way she once did, she sat quietly across the table and asked if she could help sort the photographs by year. "You'd have to be careful," I said. "No pens near them. Cotton gloves if you're touching the older ones." "Show me," she said. And I did. And for the first time since my father's death, we sat together in something that felt less like managing a crisis and more like actually remembering him. "He really thought about this," she said at one point, holding up the letter I'd shown her, reading it slowly, her lips moving slightly, the way they do when she's fighting tears. He really planned it out. I wish he'd told me directly, instead of trusting a piece of paper to. "Tell me later." "Maybe he knew paper would outlast the moment," I said. "That's kind of the whole point of what I do, Mom. People forget conversations." "They don't forget documents, not if you keep them right." She looked at me. Then, with something I hadn't seen from her in years, not quite pride, but close to it, an acknowledgement that had been overdue for most of my adult life. "Your father was right about you," she said. I should have listened to him sooner. Aaron and I did not become close. In the aftermath, and I want to be honest about that too. Because I think stories like this one sometimes promise a clean, warm ending that real families rarely get. He returned what the camera caught. He apologized in his limited way. He did not, in the months that followed, call to ask how the restoration was going, did not ask to see the letter Dad had left me, did not offer, even once, to help sort through what remained in the unit. We speak now mostly through our mother, at holidays, in short, careful conversations that avoid the subject of storage units entirely. It is not the reconciliation I might have written if I were inventing this story instead of living it, but it is, I've come to accept, an honest one. Unequal repair, my father might have called it, if he'd had the words for what happened after he was gone. Something returned, something lost, and a daughter left to catalog the difference. Mr. Keene, of all people, sent a card a few weeks later, a plain one from the drugstore, with a short note inside. "Wanted to say your father would be proud of how you handled that." Not every family does. If you ever need copies of anything from our records, you know where to find me. I keep that card in the same drawer as the school folder my father saved, because I think it belongs among the other proofs that someone, somewhere, was paying honest attention. I still visit Unit 214 sometimes, now that the account has been properly reorganized. My name listed clearly, my access unquestioned, a fact confirmed in writing by Mr. Keene after Aaron finally signed the updated paperwork without complaint, a small, quiet acknowledgement that the addendum had been real all along and had simply been waiting, like most good records do, for someone to actually read it. Before we close this one out, if you believe families should keep honest records instead of easy stories, drop a comment and let me know. It reminds me why I keep telling these. Tonight, the box marked for the important ones sits mostly empty on my desk, its contents rehoused in new archival folders, each one labeled in my own steady hand, a continuation of my father's system, rather than a replacement of it. Beside it, on a small square of blue velvet I bought specifically for this purpose, sits his fountain pen, still wrapped in the same sheet of acid-free tissue paper it was found in. Exactly as he left it, because some objects don't need improving, only preserving. I don't write with it. I'm not sure I ever will. Some things are meant to be kept rather than used, the way a folder can hold a story even when nobody opens it for years. The way a lock can be changed at midnight, but never actually erase what a father wrote down in December, sober and certain. 2 months before he knew he was dying, when he sat across from a stranger named Keen and said, out loud, for the record, that his daughter would know how to keep things right. I did keep them right as I could, given what was lost and what remained. That, I think, is the only kind of ending real families get. Uneven, incomplete, but documented, provable, true. And when people ask me now what I do for a living, I still say archivist, still say old paper, still say County Historical Society. But I say it now without apology, because I know, in a way I didn't before that corridor and that midnight timestamp, exactly what it means to be the one who is trusted to keep a family's real story straight, folder by folder, long after everyone else has stopped paying attention.